Hey everybody, seems we're live. I hope you guys can hear me. Let me know if you can hear me and or see me. My face and my voice here in Cammy's garage. Anyone? Great. Thank you, Andy, for letting me know. Thanks everybody for coming. I started a little bit early just to make sure things are running properly. So I have my lovely and talented assistant, Lori the Maker, here. You can check her out on Instagram at Lori the Maker, all one word, LORITHEMAKER. So she's lounging over there. Hopefully she will moderate the comments and things. So, and let me know of any questions that come up in the chat. So we'll just wait a few minutes, another minute or two maybe, for more people to show up. Unfortunately, I had to leave the previous stream early in order to get ready in the shop here to go live. And since we're live, I'm going to flip this around. So, well, my assistant isn't helping me yet.
What are you doing today, Cammy? Asked Doug Miller.
Well, that's a great question, Doug. I'm glad you asked. I'm actually not going to make anything unless I have more time that I need to kill. I today am going to talk about how I make segmented rings for wood turning. And you don't necessarily have to turn segmented rings. For example, just one second. This is my current project. I am making nightstands for our bedroom. And this is a 19-inch diameter cylinder that I made out of segmented rings. It's walnut oak, and I have one ring of mahogany right there. I didn't actually turn this. I put it on the lathe, but I neglected, when I made this thing, I neglected to consider the dimensions of my banjo, which holds the tool rest. And because this is so big, I have a 20-inch swing on my lathe, but the banjo was 2 inches in high. So effectively, the swing is only 16 inches. Didn't consider that when I was making this, so I couldn't actually turn this traditionally. So what I did was I mounted it on the lathe anyway and used the angle grinder on it while it was spinning to smooth the size. So it's not a perfect cylinder, but you can't tell just by looking at it. Like I said, there's two of these. So I sanded it and I cut these openings out with the jigsaw. So this is going to be a drawer and this is going to be a door. So I have the hardware and things to make it, but I have been delayed making this in the shop. Full disclosure, I haven't been doing any work in the shop lately. I don't want to bring anyone down, but unfortunately my dad passed away on Tuesday, so I've been taking a break from the shop. Hopefully I'll get back to these pieces soon. I'm kind of anxious to finish them and move on to something else. But I've been receiving a lot of very nice messages and lots of love from friends and family. So it's making it easier, even though it's very difficult for me because I can't go back to Canada. My family lives in Canada and I live in the United States, obviously. So I can't even go home because of border restrictions due to COVID. So the best thing for me to do is just stay home and stay healthy and concentrate on my work, I guess. So I'm just going to put this back. Thank you very much for the kind words, everyone. like I said, I didn't want to bring anyone down.
Someone says it's a beautiful nightstand, and wow, that's massive. Should be.
Yes, I hope it's beautiful in the end. And yeah, today it's a beautiful day. It's about 20 degrees Celsius. Obviously, perfect day. The sun is shining in. Unfortunately, it's not very good for lighting. Uh, intense sunlight is not necessarily the best lighting, but we got all the doors open. The breeze is blowing through. It's a wonderful day here in Columbia, South Carolina. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. The first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to open a package that was sent to me from Brad's Workbench. Now, Brad makes um, finishing a finishing kit that you can order from him, and he sent me one to try out. And I promised him I'd film opening it, and this is the package. So I figured this is the best time, as good a time as any, to look at what's included in his kit. So very similar to Hampshire Sheen, there's a sanding paste and a tongue wax finish. He's included instructions on how to use it. He's given me a sticker which is gonna go on the lathe very soon. Just gonna open up, show you what's in here. So there's a sanding paste. I've got some Hampshire Sheen as well. I'm gonna guess that it's a similar type of product, as well as a tongue wax finish. So that's very cool of Brad's workshop to send me this. I can't wait to try it out. Unfortunately, it won't be today. Maybe in a future video. Thanks a lot, Brad. Appreciate it. He also sent me a little thank you note. Anyway, on to the meat of the video, the live stream today. As I said, I'm going to talk about how I made the segmented rings, or just segmented rings in general. I have a couple of leftover rings that I didn't use on that project I just showed you. These are, like I said, 19 inches in diameter. So okay, let's get down to the foundation of doing segmented rings. Now there are websites out there that you can use to just put in your dimensions that you want and the number of segments that you want, and it will give you, like, do all the math for you and everything. And that's a really easy option, but that doesn't necessarily allow you to understand why these things are the way they are. So I'm just going to cut. I have some craft paper here that I can cut. I'm sorry, what? Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot to change that clock, I guess. Well spotted. I didn't even think about it. I was just looking at the minute hand. All right. Sorry, I was hoping you were gonna work the camera here. So I like to have craft paper around, not only to protect my bench from glue if I'm doing a lot of glue ups. For example, if I'm gluing up segmented rings, I can prevent the glue from spilling out onto my bench, so I don't have to worry about cleanup later. But it's also great for drawing right on the bench. So, what?
Hammer Sheen?
Hampshire Sheen.
Abrasive paste? You mean Yorkshire grit? Or I don't understand.
Yeah, I probably confused those two things. You know, on top of Brad's tongue wax finish and sanding paste, I also have some Yorkshire grit and some Hampshire Sheen that I also use. I got these recently just to try them out, and they all work great. I quite enjoy those products. Those aren't plugs. Those aren't sponsored or anything like that. So, just in case you don't know, I'm an artist. I've been an illustrator for years. I've been an artist since I was a child, but I draw a lot, obviously, and I have done it for my work for quite some time. In order to help you understand making segmented rings, this is just one that's held together with rubber bands. This was a test that I made with just a scrap of poplar that I had lying around. So the first thing I think about is how big do I want my ring? So let's talk about a circle. I know that's a lousy circle, but first of all, the radius is the distance between the center and the outside of your circle. The diameter is the distance between the outside edges of your circle. Pi is the ratio between the diameter and the circumference of the circle. So the circumference is the distance around the outside of the circle. So pi is a weird number where it's a infinite decimal. It just keeps going on, but you don't have to be too accurate with it. It's 3.14159. I mean, that's way more accurate than you would need it to be in normal circumstances. You don't need it to be that accurate, especially if you're working with wood. So in order to determine how many, so you determine how big your diameter needs to be of your ring. Then in order to figure out how or what angle to cut these pieces, you need to say, well, there's 360 degrees in a circle. This is 180, 90 degrees, and 270 over here, I think. So up here is also 360. So you simply take the number of segments that you want. You divide 360 by the number of segments that you want. In this case, there's 18 segments. So each one of these wedges has to be 20 degrees. In order to get a 20-degree wedge, you take your piece of material and you cut it on a miter saw once, and you flip it over and then cut it again at the same angle. So you have to make two cuts. So basically you take the number of degrees in this wedge divided by 2 to get how many degrees you have to set your miter saw to cut. So we'll just move over to the miter saw. Maybe I can show you. Are you? You're not going to help me here? Come on. So in order to make sure my saw is as accurate as it can be, this is a compound saw. So not only can I cut an angle this way, but I can also cut the angle this way at the same time. So in order to make sure that it's straight up and down, I just take a square and set it here, move the saw down, and just compare it to the edge of just compare it to the saw blade, just to make sure it's straight up and down. I mean, I won't be cutting compound, making compound cuts just to make segmented rings. But if you have a slight angle on these, they'll end up like making a cone shape rather than being straight and flat. And you want these to be as straight and flat as you can possibly get them, because it'll make it easier later to glue them into a stack, if that makes sense. But you end up having to sand this face anyway. I have a large, those of you who've seen my streams before know that I have a 20-inch disc sander that I can sand these rings with. And that's one of the reasons why I made the disc sander as well. So my first cut.
Have you described the last bit, like what's holding it together?
I'm gonna get to that.
Okay.
Lori, thanks though. So the best thing to do is have already milled pieces of lumber that are, as straight as you can get it on the edge. I don't have a table saw, but the table saw is the most accurate way to make cuts. And I know there's people that have sleds that they can make really accurate cuts with. Unfortunately, this is the best as I can use right now. This piece was cut on the bandsaw. So I don't know if you can see there's kerf marks in it. Now, in order to be as accurate as possible, you want this edge to be as straight as possible to go against the miter saw fence. Now, I'm just talking about the miter saw fence because that's what I have. If you have a table saw, all the power to you. You can get more accurate cuts that way. So that's how I initially, so I set my number of degrees. In this case, it was 10 because I'm talking about 18 segments. And I make the first cut, throw out the excess, flip it over, and then make the next cut. Actually, it'd probably be better if I did it. Yeah, so I do it on this side. Now that I remember, sorry about that. I don't know if you can see I've made marks here on this fence. So what I do is, well, I've jumped ahead of myself. You first have to determine how large you want these segments to be. And I've made marks here that I can make repeating cuts. You could use a stop block if you wanted. I feel it's just faster to make a line or a mark there and cut a whole bunch. So let me talk a little bit about how to determine how big you want those pieces to be. So in this case, I had
So it says clamp a stop block to the back fence.
Yeah, I already mentioned that. I guess they didn't hear me. Use a stop block. So this one is 14 millimeters. I'm going to use millimeters just for this demo because it's easier than, the math is easier than inches. So if I want this ring to be 14 centimeters, so 140 millimeters. If you do the math, you take, so you have to figure out the circumference of this ring. So you multiply your number of segments, you determine, oh, my brain is not working now. Sorry about that. Thinking about other things. So you have to determine the circumference of your ring, and you do that by multiplying the diameter by pi. So in this case, it's 140. So if you do the math, I don't have a calculator right here, but this individual piece is 25 millimeters. Now this isn't going to be super accurate, but it doesn't have to be for this particular application because you're going to turn it, well, in this case, I was going to turn them anyway. So I always build in a little bit of extra because I have to turn it away anyway. So I go over to my miter saw. And then I'll take my ruler and I'll put it on here. Well, the best thing to do is center your saw at 0 degrees, and then you can put the edge of the ruler against the blade, assuming you have an accurate ruler, and then look to see your measurement. And I'll take a pencil, or you could use a marker or something, and mark my 25 millimeters there with the pencil. So I can take my piece of wood, line it up with the mark, make my cut, flip it over, make the next cut, and just repeatedly make all the cuts you need. A good thing to do is to take a piece of scrap and make a test ring. That's what this is. I made this just to ensure that all the cuts were accurate. Usually they're not accurate. I kind of got lucky on this one because there are no gaps. If if you put your ring together, once you cut all your segments and they look like this, where there's a gap in the middle, but they're touching on the outside edge, but not on the inside edge, you need to decrease the angle that you're cutting at. Whereas if it looks like this and they're touching on the middle, but not on the outside, you need to increase your angle. I think. No, it's the other. Maybe it's the other way around. Yeah. So if it's like this, then yeah. So I think I was right. Increase the angle if it looks like that. Decrease the angle if it looks like that. Yeah. So once you know that it's accurate, you can go and make all your cuts. Now, I used to just draw a straight line on my lumber and just cut it with a bandsaw, but it would always be wavy and it wouldn't necessarily be as accurate as it could possibly be. I cut this with I improvised a rip fence with a piece of straight lumber and a couple of clamps. And I have that set up here. It's still set up on my bandsaw here. So I just take a ruler and I measure both edges from the edge of the table because I know the edge of the table is square. So I just put a ruler to adjust where I want my fence to be, quote unquote fence. I was just about to talk about that. Thanks for mentioning that. So if they're not accurate and you've cut a whole bunch of pieces and you don't know what to do, what I've often have done is I just take dowels and I put dowels in between, whereas where I glue one half of the rings on both sides, I put a dowel in there like that. And what that will do is it'll hold these together while the glue dries. And then once the glue dries, you can take this out and then you can sand that edge flat. So I can show you. I don't have a piece of sandpaper on here right now, but I think I have a half of a ring over here. Thought I did somewhere. Well, I can just use this anyway. This was something I did for a demo a long time ago, and it's been sitting on the shelf since. I don't have a piece of sandpaper on here right now because I was going to change it. But you can sand the faces flat like this with this spinning, and just sand the face flat. And then you can glue those final two faces together to get your full ring. So once you have your full ring glued together, I know not everyone is going to have a giant disc sander like this, but if you have a lathe, you can. I know there's a lot of woodturners watching right now. If you have a lathe, you can make one of these for yourself. But I'll take the ring and just sand the face flat, as is the spinning, of course. And you can use your imagination and imagine there's sandpaper on there. Actually, I sanded my finger pretty good the other day when I was there last week or the week before when I was sanding the giant 19-inch rings. Yeah, it went right through my fingernail. I won't show you that though. You have to, when you're gluing up multiple rings, you have to make sure that there's going to be enough overlap. If you are doing a cone shape or a bowl shape, this is a bad example because these are both exactly the same size. Number one, when you glue them together, you have to overlap them so that the seams don't line up in order to give it strength. If you do, I mean, you could do two at once just for a visual effect, but if you put them all together like that, that's not necessarily a good thing because those um, seams could fail. The reason why you overlap them like this is so that they have strength and stay together better. I've found that about 12 segments in a ring is a good compromise between ease and having to cut less pieces. I feel like less pieces than that uh, the angle between the two pieces is too great, so they wouldn't necessarily glue together very well. So in this case, because I had so many, this was so big, that's why I decided to do 18 pieces in these rings. Like I said, that was my test cut. So you can make test cuts with just a scrap of wood. This poplar is pretty cheap wood around here, and it's nice and soft and pretty easy to work with. And I had a bunch of scraps that I got from my friend Larry Reeves. As I said, if you're making a bowl-like shape or a plate or something like that, obviously the width of your lumber is going to be wider because you need, and then they have to be wider depending on the angle. I should have brought out some examples, but the Stanley Cup video, if you go back in my feed and you watch the Stanley Cup video, that's a pretty good example because I used this wood in that piece, and once it came near the top where it came in a little bit, I basically had to use a wider piece of lumber because I needed to step down the size of it. So the hole basically in the middle here was a lot smaller. But the smaller that you make it, the more chance that it may fail. Because I've discovered in the past, I made a few new mistakes, obviously, in making segmented pieces because I was experimenting a lot. And the smaller that you make this hole in the middle, the more chance that these pieces are gonna, um, you know, work against each other and possibly fail. So what I discovered was that if you have a wedge piece that's say um, a wedge that's this shape, because of the nature of wood, if the grain is running this way, that wood is going to shrink and change shape with humidity. So it's going to shrink or grow in this direction, and that can actually change the angle of these change these angles essentially, because if it gets smaller this way, this edge is going to get smaller this way. So if it gets smaller like this angle is going to change. It's going to become steeper like that. So that'll make this ring want to collapse in on itself, and it could fail. I've had that happen to a couple of art pieces that I've made in the past where they've actually failed on me, and it's kind of embarrassing. But I learned a good lesson there. I'm just trying to help you prevent making mistakes. Lori's talking to me. I don't understand what she's asking me. Was there a question from the comments?
Not a question, but I think you could be clearer because you just illustrated what wouldn't work, what is not ideal. Can you draw the ideal for how the grain should be?
Well, this orientation of the grain is, I mean, you could have the grain running this way in the pieces if you wanted, but it would be difficult to cut it like that because lumber is generally made with the grain going this way. So if you were to try to cut it you couldn't cut it on a miter saw because you'd be cutting the grain like this, unless I had a wider board. For example, if I took a board like this and I cut this way, the grain in this board is running this way. If I cut here and then put it on the miter saw like this, you could do that, I guess. That might give you a different look to your pieces because this would all be end grain right here rather than side grain. That might be an interesting thing to try in the future. Yeah, I'm all about trying new things. The problem with cutting short pieces like this, it's better to have longer pieces because you end up having a scrap in the end that you can't necessarily use. I have like a whole bucket of these little scraps because once you get down to a certain size on the miter saw, it's not safe to cut anything smaller than about that size.
Would that work gluing and grain together?
Well, this is gluing end grain together, but that is not what lends it the strength. What you need to have multiple layers glued together in order to have the strength of the wood glue holding it together. Because well, end grain, I think end grain glue ups are stronger than what people think, but at the same time, it's way stronger to glue side grain together. So you have to keep that in mind when you're making your things. I've made like loop type projects in the past where I've simply used, you know, one ring that has had just end grain glue ups, and they've failed on me. So I've had to go back and repair them, and one of them actually failed again. So I don't recommend doing that. I recommend having at least 2 or 3 layers glued together if you're gonna be doing segmented things, segmented pieces. Then all that makes sense to people. Do you have any specific questions or anything like that? Gosh, I've only been talking for half an hour, so I gotta kill half an hour. Please hit me up with your questions. I wasn't sure how long this was going to go because I'm just making this up as I go. I really appreciate everyone tuning in today. I'm not necessarily done. I may have to figure out something else to do to to fill up the rest of the time, or maybe you can just go take a break. Yeah, hit me up with some random questions. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cameron Porter, and this is Cammy's Garage, and I was a animator for 20 years. I worked on The Simpsons for a little while. I lived in Los Angeles. I lived in near Toronto. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Now I live in Columbia, South Carolina. I've been doing this since about 2017. I've been an artist my entire life, and I made a career as an artist, an illustrator, an animator. Now my preferred medium is wood. Previously, it was drawing on paper and drawing on my computer. But since 2017, I've been a full-time studio artist, and content creator for YouTube and Instagram. I've had a lot of viral videos on Instagram, like make it to Reddit and Facebook and stuff like that. Can't seem to get that same magic on my YouTube channel, however.
Jordan Woodwork suggests making a spoon, and Tommy's Woodshop says he's from Halifax, West Yorkshire.
Yeah, there is a Halifax in the UK. I'm aware of that. Halifax was originally an English port when the colonialists started coming from Europe. It's actually a very old city. It has a fortress in the middle, a stone fortress in the middle of it from the 1700s. Lots of history in Halifax.
Carl asks, is segmenting one of your favorite things to make?
Yes, I do like segmenting, actually. I find it's very interesting. As Andy Pugh has pointed out or noticed, that I tend to gravitate towards geometric shapes and repeating patterns and things like that. So I think that's why segmenting appeals to me. And I just like cutting things up and gluing them back together, I think. Yeah, plus I started off Candy's Garage using pretty much exclusively reclaimed materials, reclaimed wood. I would gather wood from my neighborhood. I'd literally dumpster dive to get, oak flooring and things like that. And because they're irregularly sized and shaped, I would have to cut them up into smaller pieces and then glue them back together into something else. Back in between 2013 and 2016, I went to University of South Carolina to get an art degree, and that's when I kind of really discovered that I enjoy working with wood and the lathe, especially. I kind of really enjoyed that. I found it very satisfying. Turned a lot of bowls, and just kind of went from there. I was making some furniture for the house, really simple stuff, and just held together with screws, basically simple cuts and no traditional joinery at all. Because I'm a hack. I'll admit, I'm a hack.
Rob C.P. Woodturner asks, do you find segmented work makes you think more about the design before you start turning?
Uh, yes, it does because it need. Yeah. So the question from Rob was, does making segmented pieces make you think about the design more? Yes, absolutely, because segmenting takes a little more planning than just throwing a piece of throwing a log on your lathe and turning something. Because I feel like you can just organically come up with something if you just put a rough piece of wood on the lathe, but you really have to think about what you're doing in order to do a segmented piece. But I feel like the look of a segmented piece is a lot more satisfying to me. I'm sure that's just my personal preference.
Did you use the online calculator when first starting your segmented pieces?
Did I use the online calculator? No, I did exactly what I showed you here. This is, just elementary math that I learned in school that stuck with me, and I've figured everything out by myself, just using a calculator and just writing it down on paper, just like this, or I do the math. I guess I'm okay at doing math, and because I guess I end up, even though I don't feel like I did well in school when I was growing up, but at the same time, something must have stuck because this kind of stuff just comes natural to me, I guess. And as my wife points out, it doesn't necessarily come natural to other people. So this was just to try to help you understand the math behind it and why you have to do things the way you do things. I made a bowl a couple of years ago where I had the base was a segmented base with a small hole where I glued in a dowel. That maybe it was about a half-inch dowel or something like that. And it ended up, after it dried, um, well, you take it, I took it inside, and because it's air conditioned inside and drier, it ended up changing shape and it opened up a crack in the bottom. So you could literally see through the bottom. So that's why you can't necessarily have wedge shapes that come to a point in the middle because that'll end up splitting apart, unfortunately.
So there's some people who say that they've never done segmenting. This is just me interpreting some things. What would you say, as a Laura Z question, would be the easiest project to start as a segmented project for those who haven't done things before?
My wife just had a great suggestion, and that is to talk about what would be a good starter project for a segmented piece. And if you look back on my feed just a little bit, you can see that I've made a few vases that are simply straight up and down. That I think that would be a good starter project if you wanted to try segmenting for yourself. You can make a small vase or a pot, a lidded pot or box. Uh, but I do recommend your base be a solid piece of wood. The drier the better, because I've had a piece that I've used I used a solid piece of wood for the base and then glued my rings on top of that, and ended up shaping it. But because the wood was not 100% dry, or well, it's humid out here, and I took it inside in the air conditioned environment and actually changed shape. So now the bottom kind of wobbles a little bit because the base became cupped, and that's just what happens with wood. I mean, you can't really prevent that, unfortunately. That's just the nature of wood. It,
So one, Tommy's wood shop says, my problem is my workshop's so damp that different timbers move differently and split, just as Cam said. And then someone says, do you have a carving project coming up?
I do have so yes, other folks have similar problems where it's damp often in their shop. Like, this is a garage. I always have the doors open. It's often humid here in Columbia, South Carolina. Uh, it's not so bad now because in the wintertime it's drier, but the inside is air conditioned. So if I make a piece out here, where all my lumber is, and take it inside, it'll end up changing shape and drying out. Uh, but if you do it right, that shouldn't be a problem. I have encountered problems based on pieces I've made in the past, but those are learning experiences that I know not to make those mistakes now.
Hodgepodge.
What was your other question, Lori?
Oh, there's two. So one, Hodgepodge asks, who's your favorite Simpsons character?
My favorite Simpsons character is, I don't know. Gosh, I would have to think about that.
Okay, you also say that you drew backgrounds. So do you have a favorite thing, thing that you drew for The Simpsons?
The favorite thing I drew for The Simpsons. Well, gosh, that's a good question too. I've drawn everything in Simpsons.
Not the character.
I think the Homer's work desk, I think, is the most interesting thing that I've drawn on The Simpsons because it's just a mess of buttons, and he's got that curved console that goes around him, just a mess of buttons and levers and things like that. That's really interesting and fun thing to draw. I have drawn some challenging things. There was an episode. I don't know if you've seen the episode where Bart and Lisa get a whole bunch of UPS boxes and they make a cardboard castle in the backyard. That was a crazy episode because we drew it and it was done, and then they watched it at Fox and said the fight needs to be more epic. And basically the entire last third of the show was this epic battle between the UPS guys that are coming back to get their boxes and Bart and Lisa and uh, who's the bully? Nelson. Nelson are fighting off all these UPS people in the cardboard box. But that entire third act had to be redrawn because they rewrote the final third act to make it more epic like like the Lord of the Rings kind of battle. So that was a pretty crazy episode actually. I think I worked on the show between seasons 18 and 21, so it's in there somewhere. I don't remember the name of the episode because that was over 10 years ago now.
Okay, back to woodworking.
Back to woodworking, yes.
Do you think you could try a floating base to prevent the cracking?
I don't know what that means. Someone said, "Can I try a floating vase?" I don't know what that means, so I can't answer that question.
Okay, so
Lori, what was your question? She doesn't remember. JP has a question.
JP has a question. What type of glue? Type on 3, or you can use like epoxy, etc.?
What kind of glue do I use? That's a good question too. I normally just use regular wood glue. I use type. This is not an endorsement or anything. I have Type Bond 2, or sorry, Type Bond 1, the original that I use the most because unless you're using it in an outdoor environment, it's not necessary to use anything other than this. This works really great. Some people like the open time of other products like Type Bond 3. Now this is completely waterproof. You can apparently immerse this in boiling water and it will still hold together. This is not waterproof. Just to keep that in mind if you're buying glue. I've used this regular wood glue for years and things work out just fine. There's another question.
Going back to the floating base, groove in the bottom layer, and that base fits into the groove. It's not glued, so it's floating. Like, is it the base where the cracking happens, or why does the cracking happen, essentially, with segmented pieces? Is it about the base, or is it about how the pieces fit together?
In the case, so someone's asking about how does how have pieces failed? I'm assuming. So, as I said, uh, it is due to the shrinking, growing, and shrinking of the segments. So, if I've made a piece, let's just say these wedge pieces, were wider, so that there's only a small hole in the middle here. The wider you have those pieces, the more chance they're going to fail because of this factor where if the wedge looks like this uh, and the grain runs through it like this, the piece is going to grow and shrink in this direction, which will change this angle here. And because you have, in this case, 18 pieces, just a little bit of movement uh, in one piece is exacerbated over, you know, 36 cuts basically. So it's going to be any little movement is going to be really exacerbated, and we'll end up doing this or this, if that makes sense. Do we have more questions? Not really. Lori, I thought you had a question. Okay. All right. What time is it? I still have 15 minutes.
I'm gonna go get a dozen donuts.
Oh, okay. Dog's opening. Okay. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Sorry I didn't actually make anything today. If you want to try, like I said, I know there's a lot of woodturners tuning in today. So if you want to try segmenting, I really encourage you to try it. You can try something that's really small at first. You don't have to use many layers. You don't have to use many segments. You can just use scrap wood just as an experiment. Yeah, just I think one of the hang-ups that new artists, this can apply to woodturners as well. Oh yeah, thanks for bringing that up. This is a great example of what I was talking about. Well, I'll finish my thought first. New artists tend to worry about the materials, like they don't want to waste the materials, and they want to make something nice right away. In animation land, I mean, you're constantly sketching uh, rough, rough ideas and things like that, and a lot of those drawings get thrown out because it's practice. With anything, you have to practice to get good at it. Like I said, I've made lots of mistakes in order to get where I am now. It's a trial and error thing. You can help yourself out by watching many of the wonderful wood turners we've seen already today, and yet to come. A lot of talented people to learn from, especially on YouTube. I mean, there's no end to the number of how-to videos. I don't make how-to videos. I make entertainment videos. I hope you're entertained by my channel. I have lots of content. I have over 300 videos with lots of variety. I feel like I have lots of variety. Someone asked, do I have a carving project coming up? Yes, I do have an idea for a carving project. I want to make orca whale, the killer whale, whereas I take walnut on the top and some maple on the bottom, glue them together sort of maybe in a wave if I can do that, maybe on the bandsaw, and then carve it and make it all nice and shiny. That was my next idea for a wood carving project. But like I said, I need to finish the nightstands first. Lori asked for these 2 months ago, and I've been kind of dragging my heels on it.
Whitehall Pottery says, yes, don't be too precious with your work. And Daniel Benitez Sculpture says, hey, Cammie, great having you around to share your wisdom with us.
Remember this thing? This was, I was kind of proud of making this thing. But as you can see right here, it's failed on me. And this is a perfect example of why you can't just use a single segmented ring in your pieces, because this has 12 rings in it, and because there's so many rings and so many segments in it, that it ultimately failed twice, because I fixed this once and it failed again. And this would have been pretty embarrassing had I sold it to somebody. I had someone interested in it once, but they ended up buying a different piece. But yeah, that probably would have had to refund the patron their money if they had purchased this. So thankfully, it failed before I sold it, so I wouldn't. So I'd spare myself the embarrassment of having to do that. Also, I put feet on it, legs, but now the legs aren't even straight. They're uneven because this changed shape and basically failed. So yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, it's kind of disappointing that I put so much work into that big piece and having it fail, but at the same time, it was a learning experience. I had fun making it. I had fun making the video. You can watch the video of me making this. It's somewhere back on my feed because I made it like 2 years ago. But yeah.
Mike Doyle says,
don't.
wow, cool piece.
Thank you, Mike. Don't be afraid to experiment and just, you can use cheap materials at first if you want to make, I mean, I'm not the first one to say this, but your first one it won't be that great. Your second one will be better. Your third one will be probably the best one.
Someone suggests 3 legs. I never have to worry about walking.
That's right. 3 legs are better than 4, honestly. That's something to think about in future pieces. Although the way that piece came together, yeah, I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't make something like that again. But yeah, so thanks everybody for tuning in. Sorry it was kind of scattered. I didn't really have anything prepared because obviously other circumstances were happening this week. Yeah. So as I said, I end up with segmented stuff. I end up using having a lot of scraps lying around. Now I do get a lot of scraps I have a few friends in town that have given me lots of scraps. Unfortunately, they're so irregularly shaped and things like that. I ultimately have to make smaller pieces or segmented pieces out of all these scraps. So this is a wheelbarrow full of tiny scraps. These are offcuts from the large segmented pieces that I've made uh, over here. So yeah, those are the segmented pieces that I'm working on right now. I've made a couple of drawers out of plywood. These will ultimately go in here like that. And this will be the drawer face. So hopefully I can seamlessly, not, it won't be entirely seamlessly, but eventually it will look something like that, hopefully. So yeah, now is a good time to end it, I think, and give you guys a break so you can go, yeah, have a potty break or a coffee break or grab that snack, grab that beer, grab that whiskey and ice or whatever you like. But thanks a lot for tuning in. Make sure you check out the rest of the wonderful makers that are coming up. Scott Grant is up next. Hopefully, someone can put the link in the chat box for you to check it out. And like I said, I have lots of other videos available, so make sure you subscribe and like this video. Also, I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention, I have a sale on right now for the rest of November in my Etsy shop, so you can check out my Etsy shop if you're interested in purchasing anything from Cammy's Garage. 20% off everything in the store. Everything! Everything! So thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it, everyone. And be good to each other. Peace and love.